Hi, friends. Um, this next unit, our last unit, is really going to explore identity, gender, and look into contemporary art. We've seen performance that kind of reflected the culture, land art that began to examine larger cultural and geo kind of political issues, and artists really went um, away to some extent from reflecting the culture in terms of the way the pop artists did in terms of advertising and becoming a lot more political. And we see um, a rise of um, women, people of color, really pushing hard to disrupt the establishment that had been showing pretty much white male artists, at least in this country, and really for the most part internationally, at least the Western Hemisphere. Um, the Guerrilla Girls, they began in 1985 in New York City, and they were performance artists, activists, curators, critics, and in 1984 in MoMA, and you can just think of MoMA as being this Museum of Modern Art, as being one of the cornerstones of the art world, and it prompted them into action because of the deep bias that they perceived in the show. There were 169 artists, and this was supposed to be an international survey of painting and sculpture. 13 were women, none were women of color, and this really motivated and galvanized a group of artists to and critics to get together and to push back. Um, and what they did is they made posters and in the East Village and Soho, East Village where a lot of artists lived, and Soho where artists lived, and the galleries were springing up at that point. They covered the walls with posters that that basically challenged the prejudices that allowed just men to show, and challenged the system. Um, and despite the seriousness of their message, their posters were often humorous. They had a degree of levity with their difficult messages. So, for example, here the advantages of being a woman artist, and you can read these yourselves. And you can see all of these here. Public service message from Guerrilla Girls, conscience of the art world. They eventually went on record with who they were, but it didn't serve them to unmask themselves in the beginning. There would have been repercussions, and so they really kind of stayed behind the mask, and they stayed behind the advertising here. Women in America earn only 2/3 of what men do. Women artists earn only 1/3 of what men artists do. And so here, just really looking at this graphic of cutting up that bill, and it's very effective messaging, and just trying to reflect the reality within the art world at that time, and even today. This is 2015, 1985, when they began. How many women had one-person exhibitions at New York City museums last year? Okay, you can see it was pretty pathetic. And then take a look at 2015. Yeah, it's improved, right? By one in each institution. So here's another one of theirs. And this is of Jean-Dominique Ang's Odalisque painting that is in the Met. And obviously, and the colors are different, but they took the body from that, they took the reproduction, and they altered it, and put a gorilla mask on the woman's body. Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art section are women, but 80% of the nudes are female. So it's really thinking about how women are objectified. We talked about some of this a little bit out of the 50s and the sort of the way women were used to sexualize and to sell. And perhaps some of the same thing is in place here. And here they're just, pushing back. It's come to our attention that out of the 69 interviews who ran last year, only 2 of the interviewers and 6 of the interviewees were women of color. We know that you feel terrible about this and will rectify this situation immediately. All our love, Guerrilla Girls. And that last bit, we know that you feel terrible about this. This takes a little bit from Adrian Piper's work, who we're going to look at right now. Okay. So with Guerrilla Girls, I really want you to be thinking about the politicization of things, where they want to push back at what they felt was a corrupt art system and art world. And how do you make change, right? So they were activists through art, okay? So it builds on some performance notions, but it also takes on, and it builds on advertising, but it puts it directly in a challenge of the culture, right? Not just to hang on walls, right? People weren't going around collecting these posters and hanging them up. This was meant to destabilize, like, the status quo, okay? And Adrian Piper here, this is one of her pieces. Think of a little business card, right? They probably still make them. I know a couple of people who still have business cards, but it was the size of a business card. This is, bigger on your screen than it was in real life. And Adrian Piper, this is /performance/ piece where she would give this to somebody if the situation warranted it. Dear friend, I am black. I am sure you did not realize this when you made, laughed at, agreed with that racist remark. In the past, I have attempted to alert white people to my racial identity in advance. Unfortunately, this invariably causes them to react to me as pushy, manipulative, or socially inappropriate. Therefore, my policy is to assume that white people do not make these remarks, even when they believe there are no black people present, and to distribute this card when they do. I regret any discomfort my presence is causing you, just as I'm sure you regret the discomfort your racism is causing me. And this is a picture of Adrian Piper. She's very light-skinned, self-identified black woman. So it's, you can see how this situation could come into play. And it's a type of interrogating of a culture and dismantling a kind of racist structure. Also could say sexist structure. And here's another one of her business cards. Dear friend, I am not here to pick anyone up or to be picked up. I'm here alone because I want to be here. Alone. This card is not intended as part of an extended flirtation. Thank you for respecting my privacy. Now, I'm not going to have two sides of the conversation. I want to just really introduce this to you here. And let's talk about this on Wednesday, okay? I want you to think about things you like about this piece, things that you question about this piece, and what you think she really means. Why does she go so far as to say this card is not intended as part of an extended flirtation? What is that? What is that about? Okay. And Judy Chicago was an artist in the 70s. She continues to make work. This is a very famous piece of hers called A Dinner Party. It's now a permanent exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. I guess we'll watch this video.
How do you feel about the dinner party having a permanent home now in Brooklyn?
Well, my goal when I first did the dinner party was that it be permanently housed. It just took way longer than I thought it was going to. And of course I'm thrilled because now my work with the dinner party is finally complete.
And how do you see the role of particularly the dinner party today compared to 30 years ago when it was originally done? Do you think it still has the same impact to its audience?
Well, if you watch people go around the dinner party, it was exactly like the way they went around the dinner party when it first opened in 1979. And so the history obviously continues to be relevant and pertinent and will be until we live in a time in which both male and female history are taught equally. My abiding hope is that before I die, the dinner party will be seen as only one work in a large body of work that has continued to evolve. And recently I've been working in glass, and actually there's some connection between the dinner party and the glass work in that when I was studying China painting, a lot of the China painters also painted on glass. And so I've been exploring ways of bringing that type of painting to bear on the material of glass, etched, fused, etched, cast, and painted in fired glass. And I'm looking forward to showing the work in Canada.
So we're looking at this piece, the dinner party, and the table settings for the most famous women that Judy Chicago highlighted, and in the inside we'll see additional names. There's 999 other women's names there, and we'll talk about perhaps the significance of that. There's a Georgia O'Keeffe, and if you notice, these are their vulvar forms, their butterfly forms, and you can see she leans right into that sort of, there's embroidery here, and she's using some of the grammar of traditional woman's handiwork, as well as sort of both the genital and the sort of expressiveness that occupied feminine space. And so she's using all of that for each woman's place setting. Emily Dickinson, Georgia O'Keeffe, Virginia Woolf, okay, primordial goddess, fertile goddess, right? And you can see in the background there, you see all the names on the floor, okay, that fill in this table, this place setting, right? Fills in the space. But also, like, she's chosen things like the first woman burned at the stake for witchcraft, right? Who decided that? Margaret Sanger, who, this one's representing Margaret Sanger, who really fought for reproductive rights for women and the right to vote, at the turn of the 20th century in America. Okay, she began it in 1974, finished in 79. So many people helped her, right? It uses China painting, embroidery, sewing, and usually that had been considered part of a domestic sphere. Dinner party presents a ceremonial banquet for carefully chosen guests. It's arranged on a triangular table measuring 48 feet on each side, 39 place settings. The guests of honor are designated by means of intricately embroidered runners, each executed in a historically specific manner. And for each of those, you have a gold chalice, utensils, china painted porcelain plate, rendered in a style appropriate to the individual woman being honored. Names of the other 999 women are inscribed in gold on the white floor tile below the triangular table. I took that from the Brooklyn Museum's text, and one of the things that I'm interested in asking you to think about, and we'll talk about this on Wednesday, but it's like, why 999 other names? Okay, I'll just leave that question there for you. Why not 1,000? Why not 2,000? Why not 1? Right? So we'll just talk about that on Wednesday. It'll be a question for us to revisit, okay? Another artist I want us to think about is Rebecca Horn. She was working earlier in the 70s. And, I think maybe it's not so much about gender, but really I think where she fits into this conversation is in how a person's contact with their environment takes place, right? And so she made these barriers or augmentations or contraptions that mediated the space between an individual and their environment. And sometimes that included the viewer, right? So here, finger gloves, right? You could start thinking about our able bias, the sort of way we don't think about people who might struggle doing something we can do, um, and what is the distance between our comfort level of being touched or how we're housed in our clothing and who has access to touch us and how far can they stand, and all these things in these, for example, these two pieces could come into play. Okay. um, Movable shoulders extensions, the unicorn piece, and in a lot of ways, it's questioning, right, um, our bodies and our beings and how we are mediated by our senses in our environments, right? Um, but the thing that I think is an important piece for us to think about as we especially go through this unit is the Widow of Paradise here, where you can see that these feathers, they almost act as a cave around the figure. And when you're a viewer for this, you can peer in, and it's very much a type of intimacy that happens there. And I think she's calling into question whether the kind of caveness of this piece is protection against that and drawing our attention to how we objectify um, a body when we see it, perhaps, as a culture. So it's a really interesting way to start thinking about how our particular gaze exists, right? Are we looking with a male gaze, a female gaze? Are we looking from a heteronormative gaze? Are we looking from a queer gaze? What is the way we're seeing the world? And I think in instances where we start questioning our senses and the way we're perceiving um, the world, we get a deeper understanding of our own experiences when we start questioning that. So I think she's important for us, especially as we look at artists like Jenny Holzer here. And this is all we'll do for today, right now. Okay. So Jenny Holzer, this piece is on the left is in color. This piece was at the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, and to be honest, it's still my favorite show I've ever seen in my life. It was just so splendid. The way the work, if you could see, this is a fixed image, obviously, but these words, just like in a stadium, moved and they twirled around the circular element of the Guggenheim Museum. And it just was so fantastic. And maybe it hit me at a time in my life when I just loved text, and just it was a really beautiful piece. All right. I'm going to jump to this because this is part of your assignment. You're going to be working on either one of two pieces, or both if you want extra credit. These are her inflammatory essays, and she wrote a bunch of them. And this is in a museum, but what she did is she had made these pieces, but we pasted them all around the city on the walls and whatnot, just putting them up, like very much like graffiti. And so here's one, for example. Change is the basis of all history, the proof of vigor. The old is soiled and disgusting by nature. Stale food is repellent. Monogamous love breeds contempt. Senility cripples the government that is too powerful too long. Upheaval is desirable because fresh, untainted groups seize opportunity. Violent overthrow is appropriate when the situation is intolerable. Slow modification can be effective. Men change before they notice and resist. The decadent and the powerful champion continuity. Nothing essential changes. That is a myth. It will be refuted. The necessary birth convulsions will be triggered. Action will bring the evidence to your doorstep. So, she has a bunch of these, right? Don't talk down to me. Don't be polite to me. Don't try to make me feel nice. Don't relax. I'll cut the smile off your face. You think I don't know what's going on? You think I'm afraid to react? The joke's on you. I'm biding my time, looking for the spot. You think no one can reach you? No one can have what you have? I've been planning while you're playing. I've been saving while you're spending. The game is almost over, so it's time you acknowledge me. Do you want to fall not ever knowing who took you? So she's got, and I'm not going to read all of these, and you can go through these and pause this, but they are inflammatory. They're meant to incite. And one of the things that I'm really interested in you doing is kind of filling in the blanks. Who's speaking? Who's she talking to? Is it fluid? Is it malleable? Can it change? Summer, in her assignment looking at Lawrence Weiner, referred to a piece where she found herself asking, what's the fill in the blank to the Lawrence Weiner question, right? And in a lot of ways, I want you to apply that same thinking, not just Summer, but all of you, to say that same thinking of who's saying this? Who could be saying this? Why could that person be saying this? Who's it meant to be receiving this? Like, who should be the one listening? Who's this given to, right? And why? And so if you can answer those questions, you're learning so much about what you know about the culture, right? And I will try to find a link for you, but you can look up Jenny Holzer in inflammatory essays, okay? And you'll see a bunch of it. Here's a bunch right here, and you could pause these and look at them. Okay. This, I'll give you this link. I just want to show you this because you'll go to this link. I just want to say that this is not her font, okay? It's just a long, long list of all of her truisms, okay? And so you could do for your assignment a bunch of those. But I just want to let you know this is not her font, okay? She also took space in the world. Like, this was old 42nd Street in New York. It's radically more developed now, but she picked stadiums and movie theaters, and she just rented the space and filled it in with her work, whether it was the LED lighting or I think this one's from her survival series. If you're considered useless, no one will feed you anymore. And so these were her truisms that she put up here. These are truisms that she put up on these things. She also is known for projections, and sometimes projections in really interesting ways, these high-powered projectors right over the water landscape right there. Okay? This, another thing she did, she would make these placards and put them on the sides of buildings. And we'll look at a lot of artists who really are pushing the envelope here. But you can see this interrogation of gender is very much a part of her work, as well as class. Some of them are funny. Spit all over someone with a mouthful of milk if you want to find out something about their personality fast. Right? She also did these laments series that were very much like tombstones, especially happening in the late 80s, early 90s when the AIDS epidemic was really destroying the artistic community in New York. Excuse me. So, and her current work is here. She's doing some redacted work. We'll talk more about her work, um, but there's plenty to go on, and I will give you all the links to the truisms, and if not the inflammatory essays, you can always just pause those and look there. But I'll try to include those images as well. Okay, friends, have a wonderful day.